So I just got the prompt and I'm going to be starting prep time now. Okay, so that's 16 seconds used, I believe. And let's begin.
So a few weeks ago, a bunch of young revelers in California made headlines by taking the risk to go out to the beach to avoid social distancing and to gather in large groups and potentially spread coronavirus. And today, taking a risk is probably not the kind of thing that you want to do, given how infectious the virus can be, how easily it's transmitted, and how much people are desiring for you to stay home. But the dice doesn't just represent taking a risk. It also has three specific numbers, 2, 4, and 6. And so as a result, I'm going to look back into the past and discuss instances in which people did take a risk 2, 4, and 6 years ago, respectively, and discuss how those risks actually wound up paying off for those individuals. So for starters, I'd like to discuss the home state of my mother and my grandmother, Massachusetts, which 6 years ago in 2014 elected Republican Charlie Baker to be its governor. Now, while I didn't personally support Charlie Baker, somebody else took a much greater risk in that same election. And that was Attorney General Maura Healey, who was running as a Democrat the same year that many Massachusetts citizens were starting to rally against President Barack Obama, which is why they elected a Republican as governor. But more importantly, she was the first openly gay candidate on the ballot for a state attorney general's race. She was able to take a huge risk, putting herself out there, her sexual identity out there, and being able to incur all of the hate and harm that came her way as a result of it. But she was able to keep her composure in the face of that risk, and was able to actually mount an extremely successful campaign, winning the attorney general's race, and she's still the attorney general in the state of Massachusetts today. What this demonstrates is that 6 years ago, back in 2014, even though many citizens of Massachusetts were starting to rally against the Democratic Party, Maura Healey was able to take a huge risk, both as a gay person and as a Democrat, and to mount a successful campaign in the face of all those challenges. And the risk paid off. She won, and she's still in office today, proving that that risk was actually one that she ought to have taken, and that it was a very good thing that she took it, in spite of the risks that were inherent to it. Now, let's discuss what happened 4 years ago with my favorite band of Radiohead. Now, if you're familiar with Radiohead, you might associate them with 1990s alternative rock and the song Creep. But that's not what most of their fans associate them with. See, in 2000, they released their seminal album Kid A, which received a perfect score from Pitchfork and was noted by many individuals for his electronic sound and its ability to fuse different genres like IDM and indie-tronica with rock music to create an explosive 21st century sound. Now, they had become known for this electronic idea and this electronic form of music, which is why back in 2016, it was such a risk when they went back to their rock roots and released the album A Moon-Shaped Pool, which is a slow, dream pop-inspired album that was completely different from the electronica of their most recent album, 2011's The King of Limbs. What this demonstrates is that Radiohead and its members were able to take a very substantial risk 4 years ago with the release of A Moon-Shaped Pool, going back to using guitars and drums as opposed to just drum kits and loops, and they decided to go for a slower, more somber tone as opposed to the more upbeat electronic tone that they had gone for in the previous 15 years of releases. And those 15 years of releases were very successful, which is what makes the release of the very different A Moon-Shaped Pool in 2016 such a substantial risk. They slowed it down, they saddened it, and yet this risk paid off. They reached #1 in the UK, #2 in the United States, and the album was named Album of the Year by many publications, including NME. So what we can see is that this risk of changing genre back 4 years ago for Radiohead ultimately paid off. Now, 2 years ago, to complete the three numbers that were shown on that blue die, we can see the Kansas City Chiefs, who put starting quarterback Patrick Mahomes into the lineup in 2018, just 2 years ago. Now, Patrick Mahomes was an unproven quarterback. He threw a lot of interceptions at Texas Tech, where he played college, and had only been in the NFL for 1 year prior to being thrust into the starting lineup in 2018. He was a backup in 2017 to Chiefs starting quarterback Alex Smith. And yet, in spite of the success that they had that season, in the 2018 offseason, the Chiefs decided to cut Alex Smith from their roster and to bolster Patrick Mahomes' stock as the team's starting quarterback. It was a huge risk. He was an unproven quarterback who didn't play particularly well in college and who hadn't made an NFL start beforehand. And yet, when he came in, he set the league on fire, throwing for 50 touchdowns, 5,000 yards, and winning the NFL MVP. What this shows is that 2 years ago, the Kansas City Chiefs were able to take a huge risk in releasing Alex Smith, putting Patrick Mahomes in the starting quarterback spot, and ultimately that risk paid off as the team made the AFC Championship game and as Patrick Mahomes was named the league's MVP, showing that, once again, in addition to 6 and 4 years ago, 2 years ago, a risk paid off, even though the risks we may associate with today wouldn't. So when looking back at this object, there are two things that really stood out to me. One was the fact that, obviously, a die is associated with taking various risks. However, you can also demonstrate the fact that there was a 2, a 4, and a 6 on it. And so what this means is I had to discuss a risk that was taken 2 years ago, a risk that was taken 4 years ago, and a risk that was taken 6 years ago. And ultimately, in all of those instances, the risks paid off. 6 years ago, we had the first openly gay candidate on a state attorney general's race, and she won. 4 years ago, Radiohead released their risky album, A Moon-Shaped Pool, and it was hugely successful. And 2 years ago, the Chiefs made Patrick Mahomes their starting quarterback, and that was very successful in spite of the risks it had inherent to it, showing that 6, 4, and 2 years ago, risks were a great thing to take. Thank you.